Good evening, and thank you for taking the time to read my post, Fisheries and Dams of the Lake Tahoe Basin, a comprehensive look at man-made fish barriers on the upper Truckee River, Dorado County, California. Let's start with a little background information on Lake Tahoe. Tahoe sits at an elevation of 6,225 feet above sea level. It shares a shoreline with California and Nevada. Its maximum depth is 1,645 feet, and of the many tributaries into the lake, 7 are present in Dorado County, and those 7 all have man-made structures which can limit fish passage. Since Lake Tahoe sits in 2 states and 5 counties, a question could be asked, who exactly manages the fishery? Well, it falls to 4 primary entities: the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Forest Service, specifically the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. In addition to these agencies, further environmental protections and research fall under the supervision of many dedicated agencies, nonprofit organizations, and individuals. So let's answer the question, why is this area important to me? Well, I've lived and played in the Lake Tahoe area my entire life. As an avid fisherman, I have a vested interest in seeing the fisheries of the Tahoe area restored. As an environmental advocate, I have a vested interest in seeing the health of Tahoe's aquatic ecosystems rehabilitated. And as an employee of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, I'm currently in charge of conducting an invasive fish control program on Lake Tahoe. So where exactly are these dams and why are they an issue? Well, man-made fish barriers are present on Echo Lake, Fallen Leaf Lake, Round Lake, as well as smaller tributaries into South Lake Tahoe. These dams serve several purposes, including water delivery and recreation. These waters all currently hold populations of Lahontan cutthroat trout, a species listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Efforts are currently underway to restore cutthroat populations to historic levels in this drainage. However, man-made barriers may be preventing upstream movement of fish. The downstream dispersal of fish can be determined via genetic sampling. So can these dams be removed? At this juncture, no plans are in development for dam removal in the Tahoe Basin. In partial response, fish restoration on Tahoe's tributaries have focused on a number of primary objectives while still leaving dams intact. Those objectives are: remove non-native fish from restoration sites, transition to stocking only native salmonids, stock native salmonids below and above dams, and encourage catch and release of these native fishes. So let's take a look at some of the impacted native fishes in this drainage. To start with, we have the Lahontan cutthroat trout, again a species threatened under the Endangered Species Act. The Lahontan cutthroat trout is native to the Truckee drainage, of which Lake Tahoe is a part. Historically, this was an important food fish for the Washoe people. It's the only large native trout found within Lake Tahoe. Unfortunately, its historical spawning grounds have been cut off by dams. Spawning habitat has since been degraded by water diversions. Beginning in the late 1800s through early 1900s, there was a commercial industry harvesting cutthroat trout from the lake. Since that point, the remaining cutthroat have been outcompeted by introduced fishes, and genetic diversity has been compromised by hybridization with rainbow trout. Although it looks like a minnow, the mountain whitefish is also a native salmonid to the Truckee drainage. It spawns in fall when water delivery to Tahoe is limited. This species is insectivorous, and it's also a prey species for larger salmonids. The Lahontan redside is a native minnow that spawns in the spring in the lower reaches of the upper Truckee River and smaller tributaries. It provides an important source of food for large salmonids and bird life. The Tahoe sucker spawns in the spring in the upper Truckee River. It grows to a length of 24 inches and provides an important food source for large trout, mammals, and birds of prey. This species is not considered a game fish. Our next species is the tui chub. Young tui chub use the upper Truckee River as a safe haven to grow, and they act as an important forage fish that spurred historically large growth rates of Lahontan cutthroat trout in the drainage. So how have the species we just discussed been affected? Well, to start with, spawning habitat has been restricted. When fish barriers were placed on the upper Truckee drainages, fish were no longer able to leave Tahoe and populate the optimum habitats they historically occupied. Seasonal flows into Lake Tahoe were restricted, and stream habitat into Lake Tahoe was degraded. This degradation allowed warm water fish not normally found in the lake to colonize these habitats. In Lake Tahoe, we've seen an explosion of invasive fish populations. Warm water fish have been introduced to Lake Tahoe for over 100 years. However, these illegally released fish, such as largemouth bass and brown bullhead catfish, were never able to successfully spawn in large numbers due to a lack of suitable habitat. Due in part to flow restrictions and cold water habitat degradation, populations of these predatory fish have exploded and are now consuming adult and juvenile native trout and minnows, and competing for critical spawning habitat. On Lake Tahoe, historic cold water biodiversity is being imperiled. Without access to the best spawning habitat, adequate flows, and cold water, both native salmonids and forage fish are unable to reliably spawn in adequate numbers. For those individuals that do spawn, any new cohort of fish will be susceptible to higher mortality rates due to stranding or poor water conditions that accompany diminished seasonal flows. California's historic drought has severely compounded this problem. There is, however, research and restoration currently underway to save Tahoe's imperiled native fish. Studies are in development to track salmonid movement throughout the upper Truckee drainage in connection with fish barriers. Efforts are underway to restore habitat and native trout above and below dams, and removal of invasive fish is ongoing. So what have I learned? I've learned that while dams provide much needed power and drinking water to population centers, it typically comes at a cost to native fisheries. It is true, as a people we can choose to artificially keep fish present in many systems. However, those fisheries should be looked at as put-and-take fisheries, not actual restoration. Unless a fishery can function independent of artificial introductions of fish, it cannot be considered truly restored, merely managed. So how can we all help Tahoe's imperiled fisheries? Well, first, we can use water and power wisely. Second, we can support local, state, and federal restoration programs that are underway. If you're a fisherman, practice catch and release of native fishes. You can volunteer on environmental cleanup days, or join an organization such as Trout Unlimited or California Fly Fishers. You can donate to nonprofit organizations promoting restoration efforts, and just be educated on fisheries-related issues. Purchase seafood or fish that's responsibly harvested. Report environmental crimes, and remember, our fisheries are finite and they can be lost. In closing, here are a few of the resources that proved helpful in putting this presentation together. I encourage everyone to go to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's website and check out all the restoration efforts that are ongoing throughout the state. Thanks again for taking the time to listen to this presentation.